March 22, 1945. 400 feet above the frozen fields east of Kassel, Leutnant Werner Hoffmann pressed himself against the cold stone wall of a railway signal tower and watched the American Thunderbolts approach. The sound arrived before the sight, a deep, resonant rumble that made the tower's steel framework vibrate. 8 aircraft, flying in pairs, their massive radial engines creating a distinctive bass note that every German soldier had learned to fear. They called them Jabos, Jagdbomber, fighter bombers, though this simple abbreviation could never capture the existential dread they inspired. Hoffmann commanded a Flak battery assigned to protect the Kassel-Nord marshaling yard, a critical junction where supplies moved east to the collapsing front and wounded soldiers moved west to overcrowded hospitals. For 3 years, he had defended German positions against Allied air attack. He had survived the firestorms over Hamburg, the systematic destruction of the Ruhr, and the relentless pounding of Berlin. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for what the P-47 Thunderbolts were doing to Germany's railways in the spring of 1945. The first pair of Thunderbolts banked sharply, their wings catching the pale March sunlight. Hoffmann could see the bombs beneath their wings, 2 1,000-pound weapons on each aircraft. But it was the machine guns that terrified him most. 8 50-caliber Brownings per aircraft, 64 gun barrels total in this small formation, capable of delivering a wall of lead that could shred a locomotive's boiler, tear through armoured plating, and kill every living thing within their cone of fire. "Deckung!" Hoffmann shouted, "take cover," though his gunners needed no urging. They had already abandoned their positions, scrambling for the reinforced concrete bunkers built beneath the rail yard. The flak guns sat silent, unmanned. To fire at the Americans would be suicide. Thunderbolts would not simply evade, they would hunt. They would circle back, identify the gun position, and methodically destroy it with bombs, rockets, or that devastating stream of 50-caliber fire. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The lead Thunderbolt nosed down into its attack run, accelerating toward the marshalling yard with terrifying purpose. Hoffmann could see the locomotive at the head of a munitions train, its crew desperately trying to build steam for an escape that would never come. The P-47's guns began firing at 2,000 feet, tracers drawing bright lines through the grey morning air. The 50-caliber rounds hit the locomotive with the sound of a massive hammer striking an anvil. The boiler erupted in a geyser of superheated steam. The engineer and fireman died instantly, their bodies torn apart by rounds designed to penetrate armour. The Thunderbolt continued its dive, releasing both bombs at 1,500 feet. They struck the rail yard with perfect accuracy, one obliterating the water tower, the other detonating among a line of freight cars carrying artillery shells for the Eastern Front. The secondary explosions created an expanding fireball that engulfed the entire eastern section of the yard. Hoffmann felt the heat wash over him even from 500 meters away. 3 more locomotives died in the next 90 seconds. The Americans worked with systematic efficiency, each pilot knowing exactly what to do, where to aim, how to maximize destruction. They were not simply attacking targets, they were executing a carefully planned operation to sever Germany's last functioning transportation arteries. This was not how it was supposed to be. German military doctrine, refined through decades of general staff planning and proven in the campaigns of 1939 through 41, centered on railways as the invulnerable spine of military logistics. The Reichsbahn, the German national railway, was considered the most advanced transportation system in Europe, capable of moving entire armies across continents with clockwork precision. It had transported the Wehrmacht to victory in Poland in 5 weeks, France in 6 weeks, and deep into the Soviet Union in a single summer campaign. But on this cold March morning in 1945, that entire system was dying. And it was dying because the Americans had done something the Germans never anticipated. They had turned their fighters into locomotive killers, their pursuit aircraft into railway destroyers, creating a weapon that could reach anywhere, strike anything that moved, and systematically dismantle the logistical foundation of modern warfare. The roots of Germany's railway dependence traced back to the Franco-Prussian War of 1870–71, when Prussian railways had moved troops and supplies with revolutionary efficiency. The lesson was clear: control the railways, control the battlefield. By 1944, the Wehrmacht moved 90% of its military supplies by rail. A single division required 30 to 40 trains per month just to maintain combat effectiveness. Tank units needed even more fuel, ammunition, replacement vehicles, spare parts, all moving on rails that stretched from the Atlantic to the Urals. The system's genius lay in its redundancy and capacity. Germany had over 60,000 kilometers of standard gauge track in 1944. The Reichsbahn operated 15,000 locomotives and 600,000 freight cars. Multiple routes connected every major city, allowing traffic to flow even when individual lines were damaged. Repair crews, numbering over 1.5 million workers by war's end, could restore damaged track within hours, rebuild bombed bridges within days. But this remarkable system had a fatal vulnerability that the Germans never fully grasped until it was too late. It depended entirely on locomotives. Rails could be repaired overnight, bridges could be rebuilt in days. But a destroyed locomotive took months to replace, and by 1944, Germany lacked the industrial capacity, the raw materials, and the skilled workers to replace losses at anything approaching the rate they were accumulating. Enter the P-47 Thunderbolt, and its transformation into the weapon the Germans came to fear more than any strategic bomber. The aircraft that had entered combat in April 1943 as a high-altitude interceptor had evolved by 1945 into something unprecedented: a single-seat, single-engine aircraft capable of carrying 2,500 pounds of bombs, 10 5-inch rockets, and 8 50-caliber machine guns, all while possessing the range to operate deep inside Germany and the durability to absorb punishment that would destroy any other fighter. The transformation occurred not through grand design, but through pragmatic evolution. In late 1943, P-47 pilots returning from bomber escort missions began strafing targets of opportunity: trains, trucks, fuel depots. The results proved immediately devastating. The 8 Browning M2 machine guns, firing armor-piercing incendiary rounds at 800 rounds per minute per gun, could pump 640 rounds per second into a target. A 1-second burst delivered enough kinetic energy to tear through a locomotive's boiler plating, ignite fuel storage, or shred a freight car's contents. Engineers at Republic Aviation recognized the opportunity. They reinforced wing spars to handle asymmetric bomb loads. They developed new electrical systems for bomb release at any altitude. They created specialized gun sights that could calculate bombing angles for dive attacks. By D-Day, June 6, 1944, the modifications had transformed the P-47 into the premier ground attack aircraft in the European theatre. But it was the systematic campaign against German locomotives in 1944 and 1945 that revealed the P-47's true revolutionary nature. Unlike strategic bombers attacking marshaling yards from 20,000 feet with limited accuracy, P-47 seconds attacked individual locomotives with precision. A pilot diving from 5,000 feet could place bombs within 50 feet of his aim point, close enough to guarantee destruction of a stationary locomotive, probable destruction of a moving one. The mathematics were brutal. Germany produced approximately 4,500 locomotives in 1943, a remarkable industrial achievement given Allied bombing and material shortages. But between D-Day and VE Day, P-47 seconds alone destroyed approximately 9,000 locomotives. Not damaged, destroyed. Boilers punctured, frames twisted, machinery rendered unsalvageable. The Germans could not rebuild them faster than the Americans could destroy them. Oberst Friedrich Weber, a Reichsbahn logistics officer stationed in Frankfurt, watched the locomotive crisis unfold with professional horror. His reports to Berlin, later captured by American forces, documented the railway system's inexorable collapse. In June 1944, the Reichsbahn operated approximately 12,000 operational locomotives in the Western Territories. By January 1945, that number had fallen to 8,000. By March, when Werner Hoffmann watched the attack on Kassel, fewer than 5,000 locomotives remained functional west of the Elbe River. "We cannot move divisions," Weber wrote in a report dated March 15, 1945. "We cannot move ammunition. We cannot move the wounded. Every morning I receive requests for 200 locomotives to support military operations. Every morning I can provide perhaps 50. The American Jabos have done what strategic bombing could not. They have paralyzed us completely." The term Jabo had become ubiquitous in German military communications by early 1945. Originally a contraction of Jagdbomber, literally hunting bomber or fighter bomber, the term had been applied to German aircraft like the Focke-Wulf, 190 carrying bombs during the Battle of Britain. But by the war's final year, Jabo meant only one thing to German soldiers: an American or British fighter bomber, most likely a P-47 Thunderbolt, capable of appearing without warning and delivering devastating attack. German soldiers even coined a new term, Jabo Tod, death by Jabo. It described the peculiar helplessness of being attacked by aircraft you could not evade and could barely fight. Unlike high-altitude bombers that gave warning with their formation approach and could be engaged by Flak, the Jabos arrived at treetop level, attacked with minimal warning, and possessed enough speed and maneuverability to evade most ground fire. Gefreiter Klaus Richter, a young infantry soldier recovering from wounds received on the Eastern Front, experienced Jabo Tod during a railway journey from Berlin to Munich in February 1945. His hospital train, clearly marked with red crosses, stopped at a small station north of Leipzig to take on water. 6 P-47 seconds appeared without warning, flying so low that Richter could see the pilots' faces. "They circled once," Richter recalled in a post-war interview. "We thought perhaps they would respect the markings, that they would see we were wounded, not soldiers. Then they began their attack, not against us, the hospital cars, but against the locomotive. 8 guns per aircraft, 48 guns total, all firing at once. The noise was beyond description. The locomotive simply came apart. Steel plating peeled away like paper. The boiler exploded. The engineer and fireman were killed instantly. The train sat immobilized for 6 hours until another locomotive could be found. When it finally arrived, Richter noted it was an Austrian industrial switcher from 1928, dragged out of retirement because nothing else remained. "This is what we fought with at the end," he observed. "Antiques and desperation." The P-47's locomotive hunting capability reached its devastating peak in the spring of 1945 during operations designed specifically to destroy Germany's remaining transportation infrastructure. Operation Clarion, launched February 22 to 23, 1945, sent nearly 9,000 Allied aircraft against transportation targets across Germany. The operation's explicit goal was not merely to damage the railway system, but to make German movement impossible during daylight hours. The results exceeded even optimistic Allied predictions. In 2 days, P-47 seconds and other fighter bombers destroyed or damaged over 400 locomotives, cut rail lines in hundreds of locations, and destroyed thousands of freight cars. But more importantly, they demonstrated to German railway workers and military commanders that nowhere was safe, that every locomotive, every train, every railway facility was a target, and that American fighter bombers could strike anywhere in Germany with impunity. March 22, 1945, would enter Allied records as one of the most devastating single days in the campaign against German railways. The date had been chosen with meteorological precision, clear skies across western and central Germany, unlimited visibility, temperatures just above freezing, perfect conditions for visual target identification and dive bombing attacks. The 9th Air Force, which controlled most P-47 operations in the European theatre, launched what it called maximum effort interdiction. Every available fighter bomber attacking railway targets simultaneously across a front stretching from the Netherlands to Bavaria. The operational order was brutally simple: destroy every locomotive, cut every rail line, make German movement impossible. 740 P-47 Thunderbolts took off that morning from forward airfields in Belgium, France, and the Netherlands. Each aircraft carried either two 1,000-pound bombs or six 500-pound bombs, plus full ammunition for their machine guns. The pilots had been briefed on specific sectors, rail junctions, marshalling yards, main lines, branch lines. Their orders: attack anything that moved on rails, destroy any locomotive encountered, cut tracks wherever possible. The result was slaughter on an industrial scale. By noon, reconnaissance aircraft flying over western Germany reported rail traffic had ceased entirely. Not slowed, ceased. Not a single train was moving in daylight anywhere in the American sector. Those that had attempted movement lay wrecked along the tracks, locomotives destroyed, freight cars burning, crews dead or fled into the forests. The official tally, compiled from gun camera footage, pilot reports, and post-mission reconnaissance, recorded 89 locomotives destroyed on March 22nd alone, 1,026 rail cars destroyed, 155 motor vehicles destroyed on roads adjacent to rail lines, 17 bridges dropped, 93 rail cuts, tracks severed by bombs or rockets, requiring repair before any traffic could resume. But the numbers, as staggering as they were, failed to capture the psychological impact. For German railway workers, March 22nd represented the moment when their profession became a death sentence. Locomotive engineers reported sick en masse. Switchmen refused to work daylight shifts. Maintenance crews abandoned their posts. The Reichsbahn had always demanded that workers remain at their stations regardless of air attack. Pflicht ist Pflicht, duty is duty. But after March 22nd, duty meant death, and fewer men were willing to pay that price. Hauptmann Dieter Schulz, commanding a railway security battalion near Dortmund, documented the collapse of worker morale in a report that survived the war. The men will not work in daylight. They refuse orders. When I threaten court-martial, they laugh. They say, "You can shoot me, or the Americans will shoot me. At least your bullet kills quickly." I have no answer to this logic. The attacks on March 22nd followed a pattern that had been refined through months of combat experience. P-47 pilots had developed specialized tactics for locomotive destruction, techniques taught at fighter bomber schools and disseminated through squadron briefings. The preferred method was the dive bombing approach from 5,000 feet. The pilot would spot a locomotive either stationary in a yard or moving along a main line and roll into a 60-degree dive, accelerating rapidly. The K-14 computing gun sight, standard equipment on late-war P-47 seconds, automatically calculated the bomb release point based on altitude, dive angle, and airspeed. At 1,500 feet, the pilot released both bombs, then pulled sharply upward, the 7-ton aircraft experiencing forces that would have torn apart a lighter fighter. The bombs, typically 1,000-pounders with instantaneous fuses, detonated on impact with devastating effect. A near miss within 50 feet was usually sufficient. The blast wave would knock a locomotive off its tracks, rupture the boiler, shatter the drive wheels. A direct hit simply vaporized the forward section of the locomotive, killing the crew instantly and rendering the machine unsalvageable. If bombs failed to destroy the target, the pilot would circle for a strafing run. 850 caliber machine guns, loaded with armor-piercing incendiary ammunition, could pump over 600 rounds into a target in a 2-second burst. The rounds penetrated locomotive boiler plating with ease, perforated steam lines, shattered cylinder assemblies, and ignited fuel stored in the tender. A typical strafing run left a locomotive resembling Swiss cheese, punctured, leaking, structurally compromised, economically irreparable. Oberleutnant Hans Keller, a Luftwaffe pilot who transitioned to ground liaison duty after losing his aircraft, witnessed a P-47 attack on a locomotive near Hanover. His after-action report, written with professional detachment, described the assault with clinical precision. March 22nd, 1100 hours. Single P-47 Thunderbolt attacked transport locomotive number 4732 at Hanover Ost Station. Aircraft approached from southwest at approximately 4,000 feet, rolled into dive attack, released 2 bombs at approximately 1,400 feet. First bomb struck 20 meters in front of locomotive. Second bomb struck locomotive directly amidships. Locomotive broke in 2 sections. Boiler exploded. Engineer and fireman killed instantly. Fire spread to freight cars carrying ammunition for 9th Army. Secondary explosions continued for 2 hours. Station rendered unusable. 14 railway workers killed, 23 wounded. Total time, from first sighting to completed destruction, 90 seconds. That was how long it took a trained P-47 pilot to destroy a locomotive worth months of industrial production and irreplaceable in Germany's collapsing economy. And on March 22nd, this destruction was repeated 89 times. The German response to the locomotive crisis evolved through several phases, each revealing the Wehrmacht's increasingly desperate situation. Initially, the Reichsbahn attempted to defend key rail junctions with concentrated flak batteries. The theory was sound create corridors of anti-aircraft fire so dense that attacking aircraft would be shot down before reaching their targets. The reality proved grimly different. P-47 pilots, many with hundreds of combat hours, had learned to identify and avoid flak positions. They attacked from unexpected angles, used terrain for concealment, and most importantly, they accepted that some flak was unavoidable and simply endured it. The P-47's legendary durability meant that aircraft could absorb dozens of flak hits and still complete their missions. Feldwebel Otto Braun, commanding a light flak battery defending the Bremen rail yards, recorded his unit's futility in increasingly bitter diary entries. March 10th. Jabos attacked 6 times today. We fired 900 rounds. We hit nothing. They destroyed 4 locomotives. March 15th. Jabos attacked 4 times. We fired 600 rounds. We claim 1 damaged. They destroyed 3 locomotives. March 22nd. Jabos attacked all day, continuous. We could not fire fast enough. We could not aim fast enough. They were everywhere. We hit nothing. They destroyed everything. I have requested transfer to the front lines. Anything is better than this helpless watching. By late March 1945, the Luftwaffe could provide almost no air cover for German railways. The once formidable fighter force that had defended the Reich in 1943 and early 44 had been systematically destroyed in the skies over Germany. What remained, perhaps 100 operational fighters on any given day, was husbanded for rare, desperate missions against Allied bomber formations. Railway defense was simply impossible. The introduction of the Me-262 jet fighter in late 1944 offered brief hope that Germany might regain air superiority. The jet's 540-mile-per-hour top speed made it effectively immune to interception by propeller-driven fighters. But the Me-262's Achilles heel was its vulnerability during takeoff and landing, when it was slow and unmaneuverable. P-47 pilots, recognizing this weakness, began stationing flights near known jet bases. As Me-262 seconds attempted to take off, accelerating down long concrete runways, P-47 seconds would dive from altitude and strafe the jets before they could achieve flying speed. On March 21, 1945, the day before the Great Railway Massacre, P-47 seconds of the 365th Fighter Group caught 8 Me-262 seconds during takeoff from Leifheim Airfield. All 8 jets were destroyed in 5 minutes, more than the Luftwaffe could produce in a week. The pilots never got airborne. This systematic destruction of jet bases required those bases be supplied by railway. But the railways were collapsing. Fuel couldn't reach the airfields. Ammunition couldn't reach the fighters. The Me-262, technologically superior to any Allied aircraft, became operationally irrelevant because the logistics system supporting it no longer functioned. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The German railway crisis forced increasingly desperate adaptations. Night operations became standard, with trains running only in darkness when Allied fighter bombers couldn't operate effectively. But night operations reduced rail capacity by 75%. Trains moved more slowly in darkness, dispatchers couldn't coordinate traffic efficiently, and accidents increased dramatically as exhausted crews made fatal mistakes. The Reichsbahn attempted to camouflage locomotives. They painted them in elaborate patterns meant to blend with rural landscapes. They built false forests over rail yards using captured French camouflage nets. They even tried moving trains during bad weather, hoping clouds would prevent air attacks. None of these measures proved effective. The P-47 pilots were too skilled, too persistent, too numerous. Some German commanders proposed abandoning railways entirely in favor of truck transport. General Heinz Guderian, architect of German armored warfare doctrine, suggested in a February 1945 meeting that the Wehrmacht should requisition every civilian vehicle in Germany for military use. The proposal was discussed seriously, then quietly dismissed. Germany lacked the fuel for such operations, lacked the trucks, lacked the roads. The railway system, even dying, remained Germany's only option for moving supplies in quantity. The human cost of the railway war was substantial on both sides, though vastly asymmetric. German railway workers died by the thousands killed in attacks, crushed by collapsing buildings, burned alive in freight cars carrying fuel or ammunition. The exact casualty figures remain uncertain, but post-war estimates suggest at least 20,000 railway workers were killed by air attack between D-Day and Germany's surrender. P-47 losses in ground attack operations were proportionally much lower but still significant. Between June 1944 and May 1945, approximately 1,000 P-47 seconds were lost to all causes in the European theatre. The majority fell to ground fire, flak, small arms, machine guns. A lucky shot from a 20mm cannon could sever a hydraulic line, puncture a fuel tank, or wound a pilot, forcing a crash landing in enemy territory. Lieutenant Robert Sanders of the 406th Fighter Group experienced the dangers of low-level attack during a mission against a marshaling yard in western Germany. Diving to strafe a locomotive, he collided with a signal pole at 300 miles per hour. The impact tore 5 to 10 feet off his left wing tip. Sanders managed to nurse his crippled P-47 back to base, executing a wheels-up belly landing that he walked away from. His gun camera footage showed the pole strike, clearly a reminder that flying at treetop level left zero margin for error. The P-47's legendary durability saved many pilots who would have died in other aircraft. The massive 18-cylinder Pratt & Whitney radial engine could lose several cylinders and continue running. The airframe, built around steel tubing and armor plate, could absorb punishment that would shred a lighter fighter. Pilots returned with wings, torn by flak, fuselages punctured by cannon shells, control surfaces shredded, and still brought their aircraft home. First Lieutenant Cliff Sari of the 362nd Fighter Group flew a mission on November 20, 1944, that demonstrated both P-47 capabilities and pilot skill. His 8-aircraft flight attacked a rail tunnel near Oberstein, skip-bombing 1,000-pound bombs into the tunnel entrance. The explosives destroyed 20 rail cars and 2 locomotives trapped inside. Exiting the attack, Sari's P-47 took multiple flak hits that damaged his oil system and knocked out 2 cylinders on his engine. He flew 75 miles back to base on a vibrating, failing engine, landed successfully, and the aircraft was repaired and returned to combat within 2 days. The systematic destruction of German locomotives created cascading effects throughout the Wehrmacht's logistical system. Divisions on the Eastern Front, facing Soviet offensives, received minimal ammunition resupply. Panzer units sat immobile for lack of fuel. Hospitals overflowed with wounded who couldn't be evacuated westward. Fresh divisions, formed in the Reich's interior, couldn't reach the front lines. General der Panzertruppen Hasso von Manteuffel, commanding 5th Panzer Army during the Ardennes offensive and later on the Eastern Front, identified railway destruction as the single most critical factor in German military collapse. In post-war interrogation, he stated bluntly, "We lost the war on the railways, not in the factories, not in the skies, not even in the battles, on the railways. When we could no longer move divisions, when we could no longer move supplies, when every locomotive became a death trap, the war was already lost. Everything else was just delay. March 22nd's destruction represented not a single catastrophic blow, but rather the culminating demonstration of accumulated systemic failure. Germany's railway system had been dying since D-Day, locomotive by locomotive, rail line by rail line, bridge by bridge. By March 1945, the system retained perhaps 20% of its June 1944 capacity in the Western Territories. March 22nd's 89 destroyed locomotives represented nearly 2% of Germany's remaining operational fleet eliminated in a single day. The mathematics were inexorable. If the Allies could maintain this destruction rate, and they could, weather permitting, Germany would have no operational locomotives west of the Elbe within 6 weeks. The war would continue, but German military forces would be effectively immobilized, reduced to what they could carry on their backs or transport in the dwindling fuel supplies. The Reichsbahn's chief operating officer, ministerial dirigent Dr. Julius Dorpmüller, submitted a final report to Hitler's headquarters on April 2, 1945. The document, recovered from German archives after the war, made no attempt to soften the catastrophic reality. The railway system in the Western Reich has ceased to function as a coherent network. We possess insufficient locomotives to maintain even minimal service. Replacement is impossible. Our factories produce 10 locomotives per month, while the Americans destroy 100 per week. Track repair continues, but without locomotives, repaired track serves no purpose. Railway personnel abandon their posts in growing numbers. Those who remain work under impossible conditions, constant air attack, no rest, inadequate food. I must report with complete professional certainty. The German railway system cannot support continued military operations. We cannot move divisions. We cannot move supplies. We cannot move the wounded. The Wehrmacht must prepare for operations without railway support, or the Wehrmacht must cease operations entirely. Hitler never replied to this report. Perhaps he never read it. By April 1945, the Führer was isolated in his Berlin bunker, issuing orders to armies that no longer existed, planning offensives with divisions that couldn't reach the battlefield, raging against subordinates who could not reverse industrial reality with fanaticism and will. The railway war continued into the final weeks of Germany's collapse. P-47 seconds flew their last locomotive-killing missions in late April 1945, as Allied ground forces overran the last functional rail junctions. By this point, the destruction was almost superfluous. Germany possessed perhaps 2,000 operational locomotives in the Western Territories, scattered across a fractured landscape of advancing Allied armies, destroyed bridges, and abandoned rail yards. The final tally, compiled from Allied records and post-war German documentation, recorded the scale of destruction. From D-Day to VE Day, June 6, 1944 to May 8, 1945, P-47 Thunderbolts destroyed approximately 9,000 locomotives in the European theatre. They destroyed or damaged 86,000 rail cars. They dropped over 100,000 tons of bombs on railway infrastructure. They fired over 119 million rounds of 50 caliber ammunition at ground targets, much of it at railway facilities and equipment. These numbers represented more than tactical success. They represented the practical demonstration of a military revolution. The transformation of single-seat fighters into effective ground attack aircraft had fundamentally altered the calculus of modern warfare. The traditional division between strategic bombing targeting industry and cities and tactical bombing targeting battlefield formations had been rendered obsolete by fighter bombers that could achieve strategic effects through accumulated tactical destruction. Post-war analysis by the United States Strategic Bombing Survey concluded that fighter-bomber operations against railways contributed more to German military defeat than strategic bombing of industrial targets. The survey's reasoning was straightforward. Destroying a ball-bearing factory might reduce tank production in 6 months, but destroying locomotives prevented existing tanks from reaching the battlefield immediately. The tactical had become strategic through sheer volume and persistence. The German railway system's collapse had one final, grimly ironic consequence. As Allied armies advanced into Germany in April and May 1945, they discovered the full extent of Nazi atrocities, the concentration camps, the death camps, the systematic murder of millions. And they discovered that this industrialized genocide had depended entirely on the railways. The same Deutsche Reichsbahn that moved Wehrmacht divisions had also moved cattle cars filled with Jews, Roma, political prisoners, and other victims to extermination facilities. The P-47 pilots who destroyed locomotives never knew, while flying their missions, that they were also disrupting the machinery of the Holocaust. They were attacking military targets, following orders, executing tactical objectives. But the effect was the same. Every destroyed locomotive was one less locomotive available for deportation trains. The Railway War's unintended consequence was saving lives, though far too late and far too few. Leutnant Werner Hoffmann, who watched the attack on Kassel-Nord marshaling yard on March 22, survived the war. American forces captured him on April 10, 1945, when his Flak battery's position was overrun. In a post-war interview conducted by American military intelligence, he was asked what moment he realized Germany would lose the war. March 22nd, he answered immediately, when I watched 8 American Jabos destroy the Kassel yard in 15 minutes, when I realized we had no defense, no response, no solution, when I understood that they could do this every day, anywhere in Germany, and we were helpless. That was the moment. Not when Berlin fell, not when Hitler died. March 22nd, watching locomotives die. The transformation of the P-47 Thunderbolt from interceptor to the most effective ground attack aircraft in history had required 2 years of tactical evolution, industrial adaptation, and pilot innovation. Republic Aviation had built the airframe strong enough. Pratt & Whitney had built the engine powerful enough. But it was the pilots, American, British, Free French, Brazilian, Mexican, who discovered what the aircraft could do and refined the techniques to do it with devastating effectiveness. The legacy of the P-47's ground attack role shaped post-war military aviation doctrine profoundly. Every major air force concluded that specialized ground attack capability was essential, that fighters must be capable of striking ground targets effectively, that the artificial distinction between air superiority and ground attack was militarily obsolete. The direct descendants of the P-47's ground attack concept included the F-84 Thunderjet, the A-10 Thunderbolt II, explicitly named in honor of its predecessor, and every multi-role fighter developed in the post-war era. The lesson was clear and enduring. In modern warfare, controlling the air meant not just defeating enemy aircraft, but destroying enemy ground forces, infrastructure, and logistics. The P-47 had proven this concept decisively. The German railway workers, military commanders, and soldiers who survived the war carried memories of the Jabos for the rest of their lives. In veteran reunions, in post-war interviews, in memoirs written decades later, the same phrase appeared repeatedly. Tiefflieger, low flyers, the warning shout that meant American fighter bombers were attacking, that death was approaching at 300 miles per hour, that survival depended on reaching cover in the next 10 seconds. Hans-Georg Weber, a German veteran who immigrated to America after the war, eventually purchased an M1 Garand rifle through the civilian marksmanship program to understand the weapon that had defeated Germany. Years later, he attended an air show where a restored P-47 was flying. When the massive radial engine roared overhead, Weber found himself diving for cover involuntarily. 5 decades of peace momentarily forgotten in the face of a sound his hindbrain still recognized as mortal danger. "I am not ashamed," he told his grandson afterward. "You hear that sound once in combat, your body never forgets. That sound meant death was coming, and you could not stop it." The P-47 Thunderbolt flew its last combat mission in Europe on May 7, 1945, the day before Germany's formal surrender. The target was, appropriately, a railway junction. The pilot reported destroying one locomotive and damaging track. It was the 9,001st locomotive destroyed by P-47 seconds in the European theatre, though this number is almost certainly conservative. Many destroyed locomotives were never officially confirmed. Many attacks occurred in areas where reconnaissance could not follow up. Many pilots returned from missions too exhausted to file detailed reports. The railway war had ended. Germany's transportation system lay in ruins. Thousands of locomotives sat wrecked along railway lines, monuments to American industrial capacity and tactical innovation. The Reichsbahn, which had moved armies across continents, which had been deemed invulnerable to air attack, which had served as the logistical foundation of Nazi military power, had been systematically dismantled by single-engine fighters carrying bombs. On March 22, 1945, when P-47 Thunderbolts destroyed 89 locomotives in a single day, they demonstrated more than tactical proficiency. They proved that modern warfare had fundamentally changed, that traditional military power based on railways and mass mobilization was vulnerable to air power in ways the German General Staff had never imagined, that American pragmatism and industrial capacity could create weapons that revolutionized combat faster than European military tradition could adapt. The Germans were indeed shocked when Jabo Thunderbolts destroyed 86 locomotives in one day, actually 89 on March 22 alone, because such destruction seemed impossible, because their entire military system was predicated on railway invulnerability, because they fundamentally misunderstood that American military doctrine prioritized adaptability over tradition and effect over elegance. The P-47's ground attack campaign proved that in modern war, the side that adapts fastest wins. Germany had entered World War II with the best railways in Europe and lost because they couldn't protect them. America had entered with untested fighter designs and won because they transformed those fighters into whatever weapons the battlefield required. Every destroyed locomotive was a small victory, but 9,000 destroyed locomotives added up to strategic defeat, mobility lost, supplies stopped, armies paralyzed, logistics collapsed. The tactical had become strategic, the fighter had become a war-winning weapon, and the German railway system, once the pride of European engineering, had become the graveyard where Nazi military power bled to death, one locomotive at a time. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.